difference between the people from Dubai and the people from Abu Dhabi is?
I think you're going to tell me.
The people in Dubai, they do not like the Flintstones, but the people in Abu Dhabi do.
Oh, my God, oh my God, you've been talking to Carrie.
Hey, I have no pressure today now. No pressure.
Oh, that one hurt a little bit.
We don't have a greeter, but with us today is our district governor, Julie. And I saw Rita Schulte from Atlanta After 5 there. If there's any other guests, could you please identify yourselves?
I guess technically I'm a guest.
Yes.
Okay.
Welcome.
Oh yeah, Tom Hodson joining in with no screen. All right. Mary, I'll go back to the slides in a second. Why don't you introduce our speaker this morning, who has gotten up at, what time is it out there, Wade?
It is now 6:09.
Yeah.
All right. And I'm going to ask you folks to kind of mute yourselves during the talk, so we're not making a lot of background noise. Okay? Do y'all know how? Do y'all know how to mute yourselves? Okay. All right, Mary, take it away.
Yeah. Well, you know, I always say the best thing about attending district conferences and Rotary conventions is the Rotarians that you meet. And for Tom and me, that was true when we attended the International Convention in Toronto, where we met Wade Nomura. Wade was giving a presentation on the new global grant rules at that time. He is a survivor of childhood polio who became a multiple BMX national champion, which I don't understand, but some of you will. And he designed and built the Nomura racing bike. He owns a landscaping business. He's a charter member of the Carpinteria Morning Rotary Club. He's president of the Boys and Girls Club, the Santa Barbara Golf Tour, and the Japanese American Citizens League. He has also served twice as the Rotary Rose Float Committee Chair. He's mayor of Carpinteria, California. He is a charter member of the Carpinteria Rotary Club, past district governor, and his current role is serving the Rotary Foundation, which, remember, has a separate board of trustees from Rotary International. And he serves the Rotary Foundation as the international technical coordinator of Rotary cadres for water and sanitation and community and economic development in English and Spanish speaking countries. As a Rotary cadre, he has evaluated over 30 global grant projects. He's also served as a Rotary International President's rep at many district conferences. And before some of you signed on this morning, he was telling us that he was supposed to be in Mexico this week addressing a district conference in Mexico, because again, he can speak in Spanish to them. Since the pandemic, his club has been meeting by Zoom, and I recently saw on Facebook that he had given a presentation by Zoom to his club about a global grant project. I believe it's in Puerto Rico. And so it popped into my head that we could have him join us by Zoom as well. And he's one of those very great people who never says no. And when I asked him to get up at, 4 or 5 a.m. his time, he said, of course. So please join me in welcoming past district governor and mayor of Carpinteria, Wade Nomura.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks for having me. That presentation actually was not for my club. That presentation was done for a district in the Caribbean. So this is a little bit better than the earliest I had to wake up for that event. As a technical coordinator, first of all, many of you probably don't know what a cadre is. I'm going to start first with the cadre. A cadre is a technical advisor for the Rotary Foundation in global grants, specifically in one of the 6 areas of focus. The international technical coordinator position, there are 24 of us. And Daryl, if you could flip to the next slide, please. One for each of the 6 areas of focus. So we have peace and conflict resolution, disease prevention, water and sanitation, child and maternal health, basic education, and community and economic development. There are 3 technical coordinators in each of those serving a staggered 3-year term. We are all appointed by the chairman of the foundation, and then we have to be ratified by both the Board of Trustees and also the Board of Rotary International before we could serve in this capacity. I said 24, even though there's 6 areas of focus, there are 2 other ones that are included that are not in the areas. That is one of them, financial oversight, and the second one is grant development. So there's also 3 in each of those. There's been changes now currently that I'm working with. I'm in the long range planning for the cadres, and the change now you will hear soon is that the cadres, Rotary Foundation cadres, technical advisors, will now be assigned into the districts and in clubs. So if your club, for example, wants to do a global grant, you will have the opportunity to recruit a cadre that will come in here and actually assist you in writing that grant and the project itself. It will have oversight of all of that. And so this is one of the new areas that we're going into. There's also a change in structure. The structure will now be, the world will be divided up, Rotary World, into 7 different regions. And each of those regions will have one chief advisor for all of these technical coordinators and advisors in Rotary Foundation. Right now, currently, I'm on the list to serve as the North American position for that one. So I will be one of the 7 globally that will be coordinating our efforts. Next slide, please. And by the way, I'm going to try and leave as much time as I can at the end for questions if you have any questions for me. If you do have any questions that come up during the presentation, please let Daryl know by raising a hand, and I'd be happy to go ahead and answer those questions as they come through. This one here is a project that was done in Puerto Rico. It was for economic development and also for agriculture. The project itself was a very fascinating project. It was about a $250,000 project. And this project, I had originally been scheduled to go to Haiti to evaluate a project, but because of some unrest in Haiti, I was diverted then to Puerto Rico, given 2 weeks notice. So 2 weeks I was on a plane headed to Puerto Rico to take a look at this project. Next slide, please, Daryl. This project was done in conjunction with what had happened during Hurricane Maria. The hurricane devastated the island of Puerto Rico. It actually had 3,000 people that were killed during that hurricane in the Caribbean. So it was a pretty strong and very, I would say, destructive storm itself. In Puerto Rico, what happened was, and I'll give you a quick story. They were driving me to the site, and there are those large cranes that you see along the coastline that offlift cargo from these large ships. The 2 cranes that they had there, they said, "You see those large cranes?" I go, "Yes, I do." On the top of both of those, they had wind machines that would calibrate and meter how much wind was coming across on these hurricanes. They maxed out at 185 miles an hour. They found the actual metering devices 2 miles away, stuck at 185 miles an hour. The towers themselves, made of steel, were all stripped of all of their paint from actually the water coming off of the bay. So you can imagine how strong that storm was. They also found that because of the storm, it isolated the island itself, and they found that 85% on research, 85% of the food coming to Puerto Rico was imported. Only 15% of that food actually was produced on the island itself. So this is where the big push came from. This is a picture I took the front land of San Juan, Puerto Rico, where the Rotary Club that started and initiated this project was from. Next slide, please. This is Jerry Cumpiano. He is the president of the Rotary Club of San Juan, Puerto Rico. Just celebrated their 100th anniversary. So this is the plaque that they put. They actually found the building itself that the original meetings were in. So they put the plaque up there. Pretty fascinating. It's an interesting and excellent area. The club itself is about 22 members. It's not a large club. Next slide, please. This is an old plantation building. This was a sugarcane plantation that was done way back in the day. This was originally one of the largest slave plantations in Puerto Rico. It was taken over by an organization which specializes in cultural significance, bringing back historical, cultural significant items. And they decided to restore this and actually made this into one of their offices. Para la Naturaleza is actually a nonprofit organization identified and located in Puerto Rico that goes into developing these areas. This one here was, again, a sugarcane plantation. And there are also, in that time forward, there were a big push in agriculture. And the agriculture was actually sugarcane, tobacco, and coffee production. So these were large commercial growers. What happened was these commercial growers actually took over all the farmlands. And one of the reasons why food was not being produced is because of the production of those other three crops. And so this is the push now that was going to be switching it over. And this is what the actual project focused on. Never before had Para la Naturaleza actually done projects in agriculture. This became the first because they found the importance of actually doing it and the historical significance where there were quite a few farms that were abandoned because of the large plantations that were being pushed forward. Next slide, please. I met with a group actually in San Juan. This is a group of Rotarians and the team from Para la Naturaleza at their headquarters. The gentleman standing to my left is actually the CEO, Fernando Lloveras. And he is the one that had the vision to go ahead and move this forward. Rotary heard about it and actually picked this up. And I'll talk to you a little bit about the connection of that one. Some of the farms that were being done, this is one of the farms. There were actually 50 farms identified to get support from this global grant. What the project was actually focused on was to bring back these small farms that were done by families. So they're all family farms. They are 15 to 17 acres in size. And these single family farms used to be the way that they grew food before. So they brought the idea back, the concept back. All of the growing is all done organically. There's no chemicals being put in place. And the fascinating part of this also, this project, was the fact that there was diversity in what they grew. Some grew specifically one crop, others grew a mix of crops. Other ones had vegetables and fruits. Some of them even had livestock. So it was all of the above. Next picture, please. Again, one of the other examples of farms itself. This one had papayas around it, bananas, a whole bunch of things mixed around fruits and vegetables that were being grown there. This farm actually had been in existence for about 40 years. It was done through 3 different generations. And the fascinating part of this project was the gentleman that was running the farm, he was the oldest son of the family, actually was gathering up the best seeds and the best production crops they could find that were either indigenous or were better suited for environments in Puerto Rico. So it was pretty fascinating, the different genetic changes that he was able to gather up. Next picture, please. This gentleman here is a restaurant owner, also part of the project itself. Even though the production was, the project was all about growing, they included in that the commercial aspect of it. So if they grew the crop, they would also have the opportunity to make money off of that one. So this farm here was actually put on 3 different parcels. So it had about close to 50 acres. This gentleman here that owns the restaurant actually created his own little section of that. And he grew the vegetables that he planned on using and is using in his restaurant. So I thought that was a pretty fascinating aspect of the project itself. It added to the economic development of the project. Next slide, please. This picture here is of a gentleman that was working at a co-op farm. This co-op farm was being developed or farmed by a complete community. What you see here are crops that this gentleman here grew on the co-op farm itself. portions of it, actually majority of this that he's picked up there, the turnips, will be going to a farm, I'm sorry, to a farmer's market where he will be selling his crop there at the farmer's market along with other growers of that same co-op. These co-ops oftentimes are done in communities and community conjunction. So probably 80–90% of the families of these different communities actually grew on these different communes. So I thought it was a pretty good system that they had in place. You can see there that they're pretty rustic. The area itself is very, very tropical. So things are recovering quite quickly. The crops, they grew extremely fast. So production was readily available. Next picture, please. This picture here is a picture of a gentleman here working actually on the farm. This was not product that he had grown, but actually produce that he was helping out or assisting with. The gentleman you see there actually is from, I think, Missouri. And what he does is he goes around different co-op farms around the world. He spends time in Belize, he spends time in Hawaii, then he comes back down here to Puerto Rico. And he works basically for free. He works for room and board and food, and just does this everywhere he goes, and he loves doing it. He says all he has to pay for is travel from one point to another. Other than that, he gets to just hang out and work on these farms. So he loved doing it. Next slide, please. Picture here is some of the beneficiaries. These are 4 of the 50 that were actually identified. And what made this project very unique, and I have never seen this a project done like this before. Each of these people, the 50, actually get to select what they want to use the money for. They put an application in, requesting funds in an X amount, and they tell the people what they're planning on using the money for. And then in turn, then if they are selected, they will be able to get grant money from the Rotary Foundation for this one. There are different types. The lady there on your right, she actually requested a cooler box. And so she had a refrigeration box put on her farm so she could harvest all week long and then have the vegetables available for the farmer's market on a Saturday and Sunday. So that's what she paid her money for. The gentleman next to her actually bought a tiller so he could farm more of the area. The older gentleman there was the one I was telling you about that actually clones and grafts different fruits and vegetables. So that's what he did, and he wanted to try and start getting into fruits because he had done just about vegetables his whole life, and that was the 3 generations I was telling you about. So that's what he spent his money on. And then the gentleman next to him on your left actually put his money into irrigation system. So he actually built a dam and put in a distribution water system for his entire farm, which included 3 different parcels. Next picture, please. We talk about organic living. A lot of it actually had to do with changing cultures. They knew how to grow vegetables, but they didn't know how to eat vegetables. And so that was a major part of it. The other component was this lady here that's kneeling with her pet donkey, which I thought was actually a dog, followed us everywhere. A really cute animal. She actually used her money to invest in livestock. So she had sheep, she had pigs, she had rabbits, and she had chickens, all included into this system. So that's what she had done because she had already been growing a lot of fruits and vegetables in that area. She runs a community farm. So this was her parcel. She expanded out to 3 adjacent parcels. And so she had a very large area. The complete community all come out and they farm. They assist in that one. As they assist and they work, they're allowed to then harvest whatever fruits, vegetables they need to live off of. So it was a good system put in place by this one lady here. Next picture, please. The gentleman that you see on the left and his wife that is sitting down with the dogs actually ran one of the other farms. This is the largest one farm area. They were able to have adjacent 4 or 5 different parcels. So he was farming about 70 acres of land. It was a beautiful farm. Again, what he did was he actually invested in the property and the land itself through leases, got the agreements from all of them. What you see behind us is it's a refrigerator box. And what he does now is he has people in the community actually come out and farm for him. And instead of them raising for themselves, he actually pays them money to work as employees for his farm. So another different system that we used and set in place. Next picture, please. At one of the stops, actually about every day, at the stops we had at noontime, and I was there for 4 days. We stopped and had food that was actually prepared by the different farms and different projects themselves. The unique part is that if you recall, 85% of the food was being imported. Now they're switching this over and trying to make as close to 100% production on the island itself. So that 15% now has grown to about 40%, 35, 40% over the last 2 years, and will probably be going up even more. So this is a fascinating part about it. The setbacks that you find in grants, some of the hardships. This project here actually included in that doing recipes and food, because a lot of the people there had never prepared fruits or vegetables before for consumption. They just figured, well, it's not available, so they were able to, they got the taste for doing prepared food. So it was either restaurant food, canned food, fast food. Never before had they been able to prepare vegetables and fruits. So this was part of the project itself, and this was a feast that we were given at one of the areas. Next slide, please. Included a lot of the fruits, foods. This one here was actually done from roots. It's a rootstock meal. And I am actually, I do eat a lot of meat. I'm kind of a normal. I'm definitely not vegan or vegetarian. And so when I went down there, a lot of the food was actually done vegan style. Surprisingly, I could have lived off of this. The food was excellent. I loved every meal that they sent me, every dish that they had prepared had excellent flavor to it. So it's just a matter of becoming accustomed and getting the people used to eating the different types of food. These recipes are shared throughout. There's a network on that Para la Naturaleza does, and they share these out with everybody. Next slide, please. This lady here is actually part of the project also. She used her money to educate. She bought enough equipment to where she could actually teach in different communities. She was a professor here in the mainland, and she decided when she heard about the project to actually pack up and go back to her native island of Puerto Rico. She said she wanted to give back. She was getting to the point where she's close to retiring. She goes, I'm just going back early. I want to teach the people of Puerto Rico how to live for themselves, how to make their own food, and how to be ready to be self-sufficient. And so she came back and actually teaches on nutrition and farming. She's an agronomist. She has a PhD in agronomy. The other part that was interesting, this class that she was teaching was almost all women. And I go, well, that's kind of interesting. And they had a plaque up there that was announcing the class itself was called For the Women in Spanish. And I go, what is the idea for this one? She said she teaches this class to teach women how to farm. They found that during the, before the hurricane, that there was a lot of abuse of women on the island itself, because women usually were repressed. They ended up being people that stayed in the house. The men, the males, were the breadwinners, and so they would go out and work. Women's value was to be a homemaker and to raise a family. Well, what this did was this actually changed the roles. Because of the hurricane, people were isolated out. And because they're isolated out, women were taught how to farm. They became the farmers. Men could not go to work. And so now women became the breadwinners. And there was a change, significant change in culture. Now all of a sudden, women had value. They were actually the breadwinners, and the men had to work for the women if they expected or planned to eat or have income, especially at that time. Some of these communities were isolated for as much as 5 months. So you can imagine what that was like. In that time and after that now, violence of women has substantially dropped, substantially. They're claiming that it's probably only 25% as bad as what it was before, because women now have been empowered. Next slide, please. After her class, this is the meal. The meal was prepared by a local restaurant. The gentleman there wearing the bandana on his head was actually the restaurant owner, and he brought food for everybody to eat. So part of the class included this. This was part of the grant itself. People were then not only explained how to eat, the nutritional value of each and every one of those, it was also then shared with recipes. So I thought that was a very fascinating component to the project. Next slide, please. This is a map of the island of Puerto Rico, and you can see there those sites. Each of those sites are locations where projects are being done right now. by para la naturaleza. And the island itself is 36 miles north and south by 112 miles east and west. So it's a very small island, yet it takes probably about 2.5 hours to get across the short way of that because of the how rugged the island actually is. Next picture, please. The project also included protecting watersheds. This area here was almost completely devastated after the hurricane. This was actually right on the track of the hurricane itself. And because the watersheds were stripped of vegetation, they had to actually reforest it back. This canyon that you see here is the only canyon in all of the Caribbean. So it was kind of fascinating to see this. Again, beautiful area. The reforesting had pretty much occurred naturally. Unfortunately, some of it came back with some invasive non-native plants. And so they do have to go in there and re-clean up that area. Next picture, please. This is a picture of one of the volunteers. This is Leslie Mattingly. She's actually from Georgia, Rotary Club in Georgia. She works with Para la Naturaleza, and we are actually planting and reforesting an area along the coastline that had been stripped out. And so again, part of the project itself, originally the foundation says, well, wait a minute, you know, there's no significance to this portion of the project. We think it's more important to have beneficiaries. However, when it was pointed out that the watershed had been stripped along with a lot of the vegetation that protected these farms, it was then accepted into the project. So they actually had to fight for that component of it. But this is some of the reforesting that's happening along the coastline. Next picture, please. Some of the pristine coastline that you actually see. This is a picture that I took right next to where we were reforesting back. Beautiful coastline. Puerto Rico is definitely one beautiful area to visit. I had never been there. This was the first time I had a chance and opportunity to go. So that is ideally what it looked like. Again, it's an island, so it's very isolated, but it is a beautiful area. And this project, by the way, the next phase of the project, which I recommended to and also the Rotary grants people, was to expand this out, make this something that could go across the entire island. And so rather than having these isolated communities with agricultural components to it, actually bring it into the cities. So where cities could then start raising their own food there and then expand into the adjacent areas, farming areas, to now be able to actually produce their own food. This is being done currently. The organizing group of that one actually has now reached out to that. We will be looking for a global grant to work with that one. Next slide, please. And this is Leslie's information. She is one that's kind of been spearheading it on the mainland side. The Rotary Club of San Juan has pretty much been a little overwhelmed by this because of the size of that project. 22 people doing a $250,000 grant, now going into another phase that will probably be reaching upwards of $2 million, is something beyond what one club could do. So she is now coordinating this with the entire district or island of Puerto Rico and the 27 different clubs. So that's pretty much my presentation and an overview of it. This was, by the way, one of the most unique projects I ever had an opportunity to evaluate, and also had the greatest potential for success in changing a culture, in changing a people, in changing lives in the entire island. So there you have it. So I'm open for questions if anybody has any.
And so be sure and unmute yourselves before you ask the question, okay? Anybody? Ed, you have to have some questions, right?
This is Tom Hodson. What impressed me about that is the first global grant I worked on, a global grant, a scholarship global grant. A young man wanted to study community gardening, resource efficient, small scale agriculture. And the first response we had when we vetted this, not submitted the grant, but at the time you could vet a curriculum to see in advance whether it was worth going forward. The immediate response very quickly was, you can't do this. Community and economic development, it does not include agriculture. And number two, you have to show that you're going to develop female entrepreneurship, particularly female entrepreneurship and employment, particularly youth employment. And we reworked the grant to emphasize those two terms. Took us 2 years, but we submitted it again after he'd worked for a while, and it was approved in 3 days. But it shows how the areas of focus have changed over time, that what you're doing what they're doing down in Puerto Rico is being done in that larger scale, when originally it was something considered outside the scope.
Correct. It is constantly evolving, by the way. And one of the functions that the Cadre members have, our Cadres, by the way, there's 700 of them, actually is to come into the clubs, take a look at and evaluate those, because we have shared models of just about any way you can move a grant forward. Even those that say you can't do it that way, we found ways usually to get around those.
Wade, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I missed, I'm sure you said, but I missed the dollar size of this grant. That's my first question. And my second question is, I'm sure you're talking about how the Rotary Cadres and global grants will be used under the conditions of the pandemic. And I wondered if you could speak to that.
Okay, got it. First of all, the size of the grant is $250,000. It was $248,000. That's been expanded upwards after that. They've modified it and actually put more into the scope of it. So it's approaching probably $300,000 right now. As far as money being diverted, yes, there has been money put aside. There's been pledged money coming into the foundation, specifically earmarked for pandemic expenses and recovery. So we do have money out there. That's available. You can go on to the Rotary website at rotary.org, take a look and see what specifics there are right now. But there's been quite a few projects gone through currently and grants for that one. I got a number, what was it, 2 days ago from Barry. And unfortunately, I don't remember the number, but they have been extremely successful in getting these grants actually initiated and put in place.
But what kind of grants are they able to carry out, and how can you assess them?
The grants, a lot of them are coming at the district level. They include feeding of, say, people that are underprivileged, getting things out there, some infrastructure that is not available because of the pandemic isolation order. They were able to then use media, having put people in place that could actually call in, coordinate it through a computer system or through phone, and then have it initiated and implemented by somebody that's on the ground. So those are some of the other project opportunities we have. Some are looking at creating technologies, putting in place communication systems that currently communities don't have. And so this would then organize and centralize communications within a given community. We don't have a problem in the United States with some of the other areas they actually do.
Thank you.
Sure, you bet. Good question.
I wanted to let you know that we did apply for the Rotary Disaster Relief Grant. The money was gone by the time we got there, but we're still in the queue, I was told yesterday.
Yeah, there's money constantly coming in.
Yeah, there's still probably money coming in, and they're going to look at every grant, and we are still in the queue. So we're not forgotten. Yeah.
Outstanding. You know, there's also a lot of federal funds coming through too. Speaking as the mayor right now, we were looking at quite a few of those funds where we were able to tap on it through nonprofits and also through organizations, restaurants, people like that, where funds are funneling down from the state, from federal government to the state, to the counties, and then to us. So keep talking to your politicians also.
Yeah.
Julie, what will we be using our district grant for?
Well, most of the money, I think it was for 25,000, and most of it was for the replenishing the 3 area food banks in our district. That's what we're working on. But I believe your club was part of a smaller grant. Daryl, was it 1,500?
It wasn't a grant. That was our money that we came up with.
Okay, because I think I submitted something with your club also.
Yes. We also, in addition to what we gave to the club, we also submitted. Phyllis, that was $2,000, right?
Yeah, it was 2,000, okay.
Yeah,
So
500 for Promise Healthcare Food is Medicine program, and they serve a large local Guatemalan population. So yes, we did submit a request
Okay,
from
yeah.
our club. Thank you, Julie.
that's good. So we have 16,000 to the food banks, and then a couple area clubs also submitted grant applications. And we submitted it together, so.
Great. Now I know there's some Rotary clubs right now volunteering for food banks. They're actually in the food distribution process.
Yeah.
So they drive around or actually line up even. Yesterday in Carpinteria, for example, we had 500 people served in a line, like a drive-through line where we actually gave food out. So that is another way you could do it. One other interesting thing is, and I didn't realize this until later on, probably 2 weeks into the pandemic isolation order, a lot of the foods that were being grown were being harvested, but weren't being able to be distributed because of the limited access people have to the grocery stores. What happened with the food is that became then converted over to the food bank to be distributed out. Oftentimes, this food is free. They just have no place to distribute it. So unfortunately, a lot of food currently in the United States is perishing because they just can't get it out fast enough. So something for you to maybe consider is see if in fact there's an excess in some area where you could actually divert that to some place of need. And I'm finding this is another area where Rotarians could help out quite a bit in that distribution and identifying the haves and needs, which we're good at.
I want to say quickly, I'm very proud of our club. We're a small club. You're seeing almost the entire member, you know, 6 a.m., but we managed to come up outside of our regular budget, $1,500 for the food bank. We're also supporting Promise Healthcare is a community healthcare program that deals with all kinds of things that fall through the cracks. And then we also gave $1,500 to See You at Home, which is a program for the homeless, providing shelter and other needs for them. So anyway, I'm sorry, Charlie, you had a question?
I did have a question. It's kind of for both Wade and for Julie. How is we've talked about putting a small grant together for the district for books in I think Nigeria. How is the pandemic is that going to overwhelm every other project? And that's one of the concerns I have, because there's a lot of other projects out there, and yet the pandemic response is what do? You got to do something. How is the Rotary going to balance those two issues?
Julie, if you like, I could take that. I guess that means yes. Okay, one way that we're taking a look at right now, and to let everybody know here, the foundation is moving forward. Grants that have been set in place, global grants specifically, are still moving forward. There's no change in any of those. We're seeing that as actually happening. There are some areas where it may become a challenge to actually implement these grants. Right now, we have not identified a single one of them. They're all moving forward. But if that does become kind of the case, that money will then, or the funds will then go back to the clubs and the districts. And so that would then be moved out, canceled, and then the districts could then move forward, or the clubs could move forward with a new project as they see fit, or actually diverted. Some of the projects actually can be diverted if in fact they want to focus in on a pandemic issue. So that's something else to take a look at. Yeah. One thing I want to point out, and this is what I share with my COVID-19 presentation, is the fact that as Rotarians, we need to be aware, and I saw this coming from the very first day of isolation order, is that we will take a lot longer. We as in a community will take a lot longer with recovery efforts from economics. There's no doubt about that. We've been hit hard by the virus itself. We've had fatalities. We've had a lot of people sick for that one. But when you put everybody at home, most of the people can't work. They're limited to zero or no income other than what's being subsidized by the government. We anticipate some areas may have as much as 30% of the businesses actually closing. And the recovery is going to be between 2 and 5 years. So yes, as Rotarians, we have to be aware of that one. We have to be aware that we should probably be the first out when the orders of lift is in place. We need to be the first one out there to show support for what we can do to the community, because that's how Rotary is going to grow, and that's how you're going to show your significance and relevance within the community.
Yes.
It's going to be a tough one. It's going to be a tough road to recovery.
So along those lines, what's available or might be available in terms of employment assistance? You know, there's discussion again about the potential of a WPA type program coming out. What are the possibilities of Rotary getting involved in those kinds of things, which is a little different in terms of employment assistance of some sort?
If you look at global grants and opportunities, economic development is included in that. Nobody has yet that I know of actually submitted or taken a look at doing a global grant that would include some of this PPA money coming back. That is a possibility. That's an opportunity. You bring that up, you're the first one to ever bring that up. But it would fit within a global grant where you could actually expand those funds if possible. I haven't looked into that to see if that is the case. The other thing you're talking about, we anticipate that, you know, Rotary, we're suffering. We're getting far less money. The money that is coming in is going directly to the disaster relief fund. So because of that, membership is dropping quite a bit. A lot of the giving, and everything's been put on hold. It's on freeze because we as individuals, as Rotarians, have no idea how that's going to be affecting us in the next 2 to 5 years either. So in governments, if you look at governments, for example, Carpinteria, city of Carpinteria, even though we're small, 14,000 people, over the next 3 months, we're probably looking at a loss of about $1.5 million worth of revenue. Being a small city, that's a substantial hit. This is in taxes, transient occupancy taxes, and also in sales tax. So what do we have? We don't have any funds available either for resources to give to those people that are recovering. We do have time, we have the staff, we can do in-kind, but as far as finances, it's going to be a tough one. That's why I bring it to the Rotarians, because you're the ones that understand best your communities. You see the needs. Oftentimes, you're the pulse of that community, and you could see where the quickest amount of recovery could occur with the least amount of effort. That's what you should be looking at right now.
Wade, I was very encouraged by your comments about the increased role of the cadres. I think that's addressing a very much needed area of training and communication with the foundation on global grants. It's been too often a forest of hot links that's pretty frustrating from the receiving end, and that's a wonderful change.
Oh, thank you, Tom. We took a look at it. There's 700 cadres before we started or initiated this program. Of the 700 cadres, only about 64, 65 are being used. All the other cadres go, well, it's kind of useless. I'm on this program, but I never get called on. So we took a look at how to implement them. Suggestion came forward. I suggested, well, wait a minute. We got all of these experts that have been involved with projects, with grants throughout their Rotary career. Why not use them as resources for clubs? And the other frustration we hear was just the opposite at the club level, as you say. Clubs are trying to submit these grants and keep getting turned down. We're wondering what's going on, yet they had no experience in that one. So by bringing somebody with experience in to actually shoulder through and serve as a resource to push these grants in has made it better for everybody. We now have, you know, close to 100% involvement with our cadres, or will. And the same thing is true. Once we get the word out at the club level, we hope that we'll be getting calls for just about every grant, so we can get those things done a lot more effortlessly at the club level. But thanks, Tom. That is a good point.
Thank you.